Hello, everyone, and welcome to our third panel this week as we celebrate Transgender Awareness Week. And we are doing a special panel today with our staff employees from Equality Florida. I myself am Angelique Godwin. I am the Director of Transgender Equality. I can't speak, the coffee hasn't hit, so sorry, but it is okay. And we're having conversations that are breaking the stigma and busting some myths about the trans community. We feel like it's more important for you to hear from our mouths about the things that we're facing and to help, change people's minds on some of these misconceptions and hopefully have everybody have better identity or ideas about like what the trans community is, who we are as a people, and why it's important to, fight for us rather than against us. It's been a really crazy year, and I love everybody on this call so very much. They've all done so much amazing things throughout the year to help not only the trans community, but the entire LGBTQ plus community. And it's so cool that all of you are identifying as trans. And it's super dope because I don't think people know just how many trans individuals we have within our organization. This is like literally like a quarter, maybe a little less. Like there's so many people who identify, even down to our volunteers. So to have us on so many levels and so many departments, I'm super happy to be able to bring this little piece of us to the platform and the floor. So we'll go around in a circle, starting with to my left, if you would, and then we'll go around and start with you. Ant?
Hello. Thanks again, Angelique, for putting this together. My name is Ant Avila. I use they, them pronouns, and I'm the Tampa Bay community organizer, works for Equality Florida.
My name is Jules Rain. I use she, her pronouns. I'm the community organizer for Equality Florida in Manatee and Sarasota counties. I'm also the founder and executive director of the Florida Transgender Alliance, and I do a lot of work all over the state advocating for trans rights, speaking with lawmakers, and educating the community on transgender issues and trans healthcare and civil rights.
I love it. And last but most certainly, definitely not least, Quinn.
Thank you very much. I am Quinn Diaz. My pronouns are they, them, and I am the Public Policy Associate at Equality Florida. So I primarily support the organization's legislative, executive, and municipal lobbying operations. Back to you, Angelique.
I love it. Thank you. I love this so much. I'm so excited. So basically, we want to know, what does Transgender Awareness Week mean to you guys? Like, what are you guys most excited about, or why do you look forward to it? Is this your first time celebrating? Tell me more, and you guys can go as you see fit. Whoever wants to jump on that one first.
Sure, I'll pop in. So really grateful that you've organized all of these panels. To me, I believe that Trans Awareness Week offers a critical opportunity to educate the public about who we are through sharing our stories and experiences and advancing advocacy around issues of prejudice, discrimination, and violence, which we've increasingly been experiencing, particularly here in Florida, where anti-trans cruelty and discrimination have become a priority and platform of the state government. I think it's about 60% of Americans still don't personally know a trans person, which of course makes sense as we make up only about 2% of the national population. So Trans Awareness Week allows us to build these really important bridges and break down the misunderstandings and the stigmas.
Yeah, awesome.
I'll go next. So, in addition to everything that Quinn said, I think Trans Awareness Week is a wonderful opportunity to remember our history and who we have been, from Christine Jorgensen to Marsha P. Johnson to Dr. Lynn Conway, who we lost this year, who helped invent the microchips that we all have in our computers and cell phones. All of these trans people have made amazing contributions to society, and I think that most people aren't even aware of that. And it's important to remember who we have been, who we are, and who we continue to be in society. We make amazing contributions to society that most people aren't even aware of. We're more than just entertainers like Kim Petras. We are every facet of society, and we are more than just our transness as well. We are complete people. We have hobbies and lives, And being trans is only one aspect of who we are. And I think so many people need to get to know us better as whole, real people.
Yeah, I love that.
That was so well put, Jules, and I love the way you touched on the statistics that still exist that sort of distance the community from potential allies, as it were. Trans Awareness Week, for me, aside from co-signing on everything those two just said, has always been an opportunity to connect with community, take all of those really wonderful things that Jules mentioned about learning about our forebearers, so to speak, learning about the folks that came before us, learning about the contributions we as a trans community have made as through those individuals, and coming together in that pride and community space.
Yeah, I think for me, Trans Awareness Week is this time where it's kind of a full circle moment. We acknowledge the past and we uplift it. We tell the stories of those who came before us while giving ourselves space to talk about where we are now and the different things that we're doing. But it also allows us to look forward to the future, right? As we educate those who are coming into the space and giving, new role models or motivating and inspiring those who might not have the courage to stand up right now. This week gives us that opportunity, but also it's a week to celebrate. It's a week to celebrate how far we've come and where we are now. And it's a week to truly kind of, for us, to grasp where we are and not take it for granted, because this is the one time that we really get to just focus on ourselves and telling our stories, like Quinn said, and really expressing ourselves. So that's why this panel was created, was to give more people an opportunity to speak and share their experiences, because one thing being trans it is not monolithic. There is no one way to be trans. And I think that this panel is a prime example of that. We are all very different, but I think the one thing that people can't take from us is who we know we are. Who they think we are is none of our business. It's who we know we are that defines us in these moments. So I'm super excited to move forward with you guys. And with that note, we'll move into our first question, which is, as members of the trans community, working for a nonprofit in Florida that is fighting the fight for equality and equity, how are you guys sustaining? What's going on with you guys? How is this affecting you? So that we can kind of bring that to the table. And we'll start, ladies first. Jules, if you would, please.
Well, there's two aspects to your question. How is it affecting me and how is it like sustaining me? The attacks on transgender rights, civil rights, visibility on our healthcare have only increased in recent years. We've seen 661 bills passed against LGBTQ people or filed against LGBTQ people this year in the United States alone, more than any other year. And that has an enormous effect on our mental health, on our feelings of safety and security. And many people have fled states to go to safer states where there aren't so many harmful laws. Florida is one of the worst. And that has definitely affected how people think, how people behave, and how they live their lives. The support groups that I run have become, rather than talking about social issues, much more politically based, because people are concerned that these laws are taking away their right to live. And the way we found to sustain each other is through community, by connecting with each other, supporting one another, and for me personally, as an advocate, as an educator in the trans community, it's been finding and making cisgender allies within the community and finding ways to educate the community on the issues that are affecting us, because so many people aren't aware of the attacks on our civil rights. And when they find out, 9 times out of 10, they're very supportive and they want to help. They just don't know how. So I've found community and education to be extremely important for sustaining us during these hard times.
Yeah, I think it's better to speak up, and rather than quit or die in silence, it's better to let
Exactly.
everybody know, be heard, and it being loud doesn't necessarily screaming and ranting, right? Being loud just means speaking up whenever you have the opportunity to.
That's
So I
right.
definitely appreciate that for sure. My days, who's ready?
Go ahead. Yeah, that question for me is really connected to what's become a core part of my story, because I have been in politics for a number of years, and when the legislation started rolling in around 2022, particularly in this state, but like Jules mentioned, all over the country in various states, it was a time where I had stepped away from politics and I was still in the nonprofit sphere in another role. And it was so troubling to me, as it was to so many people, but it affected my mental health. And what was astounding to me is, because of the position that I was in at the time, I was able to see how these laws that were attempting to target, especially the trans community, were impacting so many people. Because the role that I was in, which was not direct service for the LGBTQ community or the trans community, was was impacted, and the way that I had to operate in that role had to shift because of these laws. So, it was really extraordinarily far reaching, and it really made me understand the bigger picture of just eroding supports for everyone, and this sort of throwing the baby out with the bathwater approach that lawmakers who seek to hate instead of lead in their elected roles have been taking. And I would say remaining in nonprofit is one of my tethers, and what brought me back to a place of certainly better mental health and feeling effective in this time has been advocacy. So returning to the work that I had been doing as a community partner and volunteer with Equality Florida, and then eventually joining the staff with Equality Florida, returning to that moment where everyone is in this fight together. We're gathering as a community, we're looking out for each other, and we are standing in defense of each other. And what has become this integral part of really my heart, and what keeps me going, is the chant, who protects us, we protect us. And that really connects for me what it means to be an advocate, what it means to be a community, and how I get up every day and keep doing this in light of things, because I see so many folks standing up and advocating against this hate to their own detriment. It's not an easy task, and they do it, and I'm just so grateful to be a part of being a resource to the folks like that.
I think in a weird way, you would think, given the circumstances of what's happening, you would expect most people to quit or give up or run away. But it's really cool how working for organizations like this one help you dig your heels in and stay steadfast and push. And a lot of times, I think that something that's consistent in the trans community is that no matter what the fight is, I think most trans people stand for the fight, regardless of who it protects or regardless of who it's in terms of. And often in times we're left standing on our own when we're fighting our own battles. So it's really cool, I think, to know that we all work for and work with an organization that allows us to fight those fights, and that they have your back, that they're not leaving us in a gray area or unaccounted for. So yeah, I definitely agree with that too. And listen, all right, y'all, let me take a second to just say that. I know I'm not supposed to pick favorite, but Quinn is my favorite. So like that, so you will hear me. I almost lost myself in a moment. I was like, next up, my love. But I'm honest, I've done a lot of fighting with Quinn this year. We actually got the opportunity to go to DC and fight in DC and run around. And it was such a joyous experience. And I'll get into my story after Quinn speaks, but I have a lot to say about about how I ended up here. But Quinn, if you would.
Well, thank you, Angelique. And of course, the feeling is mutual. So, like Ant and Jules, the work is, of course, mentally and emotionally exhausting, but it's also incredibly empowering. And like you just said, I think of the 370 volunteers or more that joined us in Tallahassee this year during our 60-day Pride at the Capitol program, on the front lines of opposing anti-LGBTQ legislation. It's scary to be in those rooms and to have to confront these really hateful lawmakers, but we're just seeing year over year more people join us in this fight. I also think about the Let Us Live March that you organized, Angelique, in March in the state capitol, and it was led by trans people who were just fed up with what's been going on with the state and ready to make a final stand the day before that bill that would restrict our access to affirming IDs and create additional hurdles in insurance coverage was sent to the House floor. And it was just such an incredible rally and moment on those historic Capitol steps. It was just so moving, so empowering. The work is an incredible gift and it's a tremendous responsibility, but to be able to do it alongside brilliant change makers like all of you is just incredibly sustaining. So really looking forward to seeing what we as an organization are able to continue doing, especially to protect trans lives. So
I love you guys. Just to add, I think it's important to, I haven't actually had an opportunity to tell my story, so I just want to speak about it just a moment. In retrospect, asking about how we handle it and how we sustain it in this industry. When I started out, I was one of those people who had no idea what Equality Florida was. And I too thought we just donated money and I didn't know where it was going or what it was helping out with. I just knew that they were fighting for good causes and I knew that they were strong supporters of the entire community. And so initially, I was just one of those people who sent money whenever I got an email or something in the mail, right? And I remember 2 years ago, because it would have been 2 Decembers ago, when we had our first hit was to the drag community, and they wanted to make drag ban drag and get rid of it completely. And I remember standing up for that fight and getting involved with the organization. And I remember not really understanding what was going on, but I became a volunteer and I started working on a steering committee and my circle was small. And as I got into Pride at the Capitol, which is the event we hold every year during legislation, I got the opportunity to see firsthand how big Equality Florida was, because I really didn't realize how big it was. And then secondly, I got to experience firsthand what was happening in that. My life was in the hands of people that didn't even know I existed or didn't believe in my existence or had no idea what my existence looked like. They smiled at me in the hallways and they shook my hand and they treated me with kindness there. And then we went into the courtrooms for hearings and I was just not even a blip or a speck of grain in the air. It was really wild how they viewed us as a community. And so seeing all of these wonderful humans go up time and time again in every single room, at every single hearing, for everything, and speak so powerfully and so adamantly in defense of and for and in support of the community, I truly felt for the first time not only visible, but I let out a sigh of relief hearing the roar of the people who spoke in my name or for me, the community members who stood up and went against all of this legislation. It was wild. And I actually had the opportunity to work side by side, Quinn, and I had the opportunity to work side by side. And at the time, I didn't know Jules was going to become such an important person in my life, but being able to see you guys in action actually inspired me to do more. I realized that the gap I thought I had was so much bigger. I thought I was doing the most I possibly could until I met you guys. And I wasn't in my position of anything. I worked as a volunteer for almost a year before I was offered a position with the organization. And then last year, in December of last year, I joined as a special events coordinator. And I started to put things on like the Trans March or the Florida Voices for Change. And I really stepped outside my box and I realized that there's a moment when these things happen that, like I said before, where you can choose to sit back and have thoughts and prayers and you can choose to wish people well, or you could show up. And showing up, support looks different for everybody. Not everybody has the ability to march in the streets, but you can always encourage others to march and you can always encourage other people to spend money and do those things. And I say all this to say that that's how I survived. When that law hit last year, in the face of that, and I lost my health insurance and I lost access to my care and I had to scramble to reconfigure, there was a moment, most people, when you get slammed with something like that, of course your initial knee-jerk reaction is to just stop. You don't know how to move. You don't know which way to move in order to get back on the bike, so to speak. So having that happen in the face of everything and seeing the response of the organization, it was quick, it was fell, it was a swoop. It was within weeks we had something up and running that was supportive, and people were sending messages out everywhere. And it was really cool to experience from the inside, because from the outside, people were like, I don't know where to go. And I'm like, I know where to send you. I know how to give you information, right? And that was the power of a nonprofit doing its work. That was the power of our organization doing its work. And so I would have never experienced that the way I did if I wasn't inside, right? And if I hadn't just spent the past 3 or 4 months with you guys at the Capitol fighting tirelessly. We were exhausted. It's like little leaguers playing against the national team. We're like, we know we're gonna lose, but we still have to show up every day for practice, and we still have to show up for work. And we can't not swing at the ball just because we're behind in the game. We have to finish strong. And that was the first time I was like, damn, this is what it's like to fight for something you really believe in, and to not feel alone, and to not feel like you don't have that respect. So it's really cool. And I think that sustainability has kept me going into this year with taking on the new role as the director of Transgender Equality. We're up against a huge battle, but I know not one single person in my organization is quit. I know not one single person is giving up. It doesn't matter how hard the fight is. It doesn't matter how daunting it seems, or how crazy it seems, or how outlandish it seems. We are fighting a fight that's worth fighting. So you cannot give up, and you have to push the boundaries, and you have to try things that are out of the box and be okay. I think we're all okay with failure to a certain extent, because that is how we succeed, right? We grow in failure. That uncomfortability, you don't get anywhere being comfortable in life. Everybody has to get uncomfortable. If you think about it, even your body, right? You get uncomfortable in your body as it's growing, as you're changing, as you're evolving as a human. So uncomfortability is a place that's almost like a signifier for change. So we've been uncomfortable for a little bit now, so we're hoping for some good change. But yeah, I love this. Does anybody have a personal stigma that they've been facing, or an issue that they feel is relevant right now? The noise is really loud. We've got a lot of things in the air. What's the loudest thing you're hearing right now?
I can go
first unmute. No.
I think that, and I'm sure Quinn might touch on this too. I think that what I'm hearing from folks, especially folks who are committed volunteers and coalition partners in our Pride of the Capitol program, they're looking towards how this election that we're in is going to impact the legislative session coming up, especially how, with so many decisions on the ballot on the federal level with different amendments, there's so many things that can color what the session will look like. This time of year, typically we see starts with some legislation, and obviously as folks are running for office, they're less likely to put those forward. So there's just sort of a big question mark on that legislative session. And I think in general, I guess it's energizing to see folks who are already focused on that and are already looking towards that. Just from our departmental perspective, we have put together, with so much help from other departments too, certainly the largest campaign program we have in the organization's history. And again, that sort of denotes the significance of this election and just how important it is to possibly break that supermajority, that hateful supermajority in the House, and make incredible progress in the fight for bodily autonomy and the right to abortion. All of those things are such huge priorities for us, and to say nothing of the sort of looming shadow of federal elections. So I think for me, it's really going to be significant to zero in on what our community wants. That's literally my job as the community organizer. But it's, like I had mentioned to all of you, it's always been a priority of this organization. So I'm definitely excited that we as an organization have grown in a way that we can prioritize that focus so much, that community level focus, and really get at what our volunteers want to see from us and where we should be acting, where we can just be resource support. And I think a lot of that is still going to include the trans community. And I'm excited that, as we've all talked about, we're ready to be there for the trans community, just as we are for the entire community.
I think just to switch gears slightly, because you said something at the beginning of that, it made me jump into a mindset of right now on the panel, we have two individuals who are non-binary, and you both are very different scales of non-binary. Your individuality also affects that. Right now in the climate, how is that affecting you guys personally? Are you in a safe space where you're able to help people, or has it been a little bit more daunting for you? Have you seen an increased rise of negative catcalling or something to that effect, or people like kind of pushing the boundaries? I know in some instances, for some of us, we have had people in the comments or on our stuff be like being very opinionated everywhere these days. So I'm wondering, has that affected either of you?
I'll let you go, Clint, in just a second, but I did want to mention, because it's funny you mentioned catcalling, because just this weekend I was headed to an event and I was looking very cute, and this man, I live in a rural area of Tampa Bay, this man in a big old Dodge truck shouted out the window, "Cute," and I turned around with my beard and he did not have anything to say.
Well, that's a good instance. That's a good instance.
I'm taking the cue. That made me smile when you mentioned catcalling. Wait, I'll let you take that question on.
I think for me, most of the impacts that I felt like largely reverberate within just the traditional trans community. It's about getting my access to my healthcare cut off because of state law. It's about constantly worrying which bathroom I'm going to use and in which setting because of existing state law, and feeling nervous anytime I hand over my ID about what someone might think when they glance down at it if it doesn't meet their assumptions. I do trace all of the motivation for the anti-trans attacks that we've been seeing at the state legislature to prejudice against trans people, to misunderstandings, and to, of course, these entrenched stigmas. But no catcalling where I live, but maybe I should visit Aunt.
Oh my goodness, no, I love it. I think it's such a wild experience, like to know, like I think there's a little bit of privilege. I think that's a stigma too. I think people naturally assume things about us because of how we look and how we present. And I think that if you don't meet a certain standard, you might feel a little bit more of that than other places. And I think the ideology of what gender is supposed to look like or how we're supposed to present or act is always a really interesting thing. I've said it before, I'll say it again. I think men in skirts is fine. I love Irish men. I love a good kilt moment. I'm also not biased about somebody in a mini skirt. I think mini skirts are hot. I don't know. It's just a thing, not even just on me, but on other people. But I think that ideology that clothing makes a person, I've always loved the term, no, clothing doesn't make the person makes clothes. And I think that wearing it is fashion. It's forward and it's outside the box. It can be considered avant-garde. So I think in our generation, there's just so many things that happen that we end up in these boxes. And I love the idea of non-binary individuals breaking that, taking people outside of it and changing the norm and challenging the status quo. I love it. Jules?
Yeah, I agree with all of that. I wanted to go back to your earlier question on like what you thought was the big issues facing this year. And as Ant said, obviously the election looms heavy over everything that will happen in the next year. But in a more nuanced sense, this year and these past couple years have seemed like a search for identity in this country. What kind of people do we want to be? It's not a coincidence that transgender bodily autonomy and transgender civil rights intersect heavily with women's bodily autonomy and immigrant civil rights. As attacks on trans people have increased, we've seen attacks on women and their healthcare. We've seen immigrant people demonized in the worst, most untrue ways. And these attacks are indicative of, I think, an identity crisis in this country on, do we want to live in fear and prejudice? Do we want to let the worst angels of our nature take over, or do we want to support people? Do we want to support their right to live as they choose and to have control over their own healthcare? And I think that this country is extremely divided on these issues. And I hope that we choose to vote and use our voices to lift up those who are different and take the opportunity to educate ourselves and to learn about the people in our communities rather than to give into fear mongering and hate, which has become so prevalent against so many different communities, not just the LGBTQ community. So I'm hopeful that things will get better, because I firmly believe that given a long enough time period, things do get better. If you look at the status of LGBTQ people 50 or 100 years ago, we had no gay marriage. Trans people had no rights to healthcare. They had even when we could transition, we had no right to get married or to have the rights that we had. Up until the 70s, women still had to have their husband co-sign just to get a credit card. So I firmly believe that given a long enough time period, things will get better for people. This just happens to be the moment in history where trans people and LGBTQ people are particularly demonized and under attack. But the tide is changing, and we've seen amazing strides in the last couple of years. 70% of candidates who ran on an anti-LGBTQ platform in 2023 lost their elections. We saw amazing progress for pro-LGBTQ candidates in the August primary win many of their elections. And those who ran on a anti-trans, anti-LGBTQ Moms for Liberty style platform lose. So I'm hoping that things will continue to improve and that the stigmatism will go away.
I hope so too. It still baffles me that this community that has gone under the radar for so long has been the biggest topic of conversation for almost 2 years now. And it's not something that's lightly done. They're not just degrading us in conversation on talk shows. This is literally affecting people's lives. And it's a crazy thing to think that what somebody does with their body is so relevant to people who have no idea of the reason why and have no education on the how even. We sat in hearings and we had to explain to them what the process is like, despite them making laws against it. The idea that they're now having a conversation stating that children are going into schools as one gender and coming home as another, as if they are having some surgery in their school on the lunch table with no anesthesia and no parental consent, just out here, just factory changing them as they walk in and out, is wild and it's absurd and it's so beyond messed up. And I think that all comes from a lot of the misunderstandings about what it is to be trans and the process of it. I spend a lot of my time explaining to people that in 2018, the regulations and the ideologies behind what transgender people were considered as a mental health disorder and or a disease is no longer relevant. It's been completely chopped out by every single healthcare organization in the world. And so it is no longer looked at something that is incurable or isn't something crazy. It's something that treatment is to help them through that process, not to prevent it, not to stop it, not to end it, but to allow them to transition. And that's how we got to gender affirming care. I think that people misunderstand that as well. That's a huge misconception. We could talk about that. Gender affirming care is not solely for trans individuals. Gender affirming care is for any gender seeking care to validate that gender. So whether it's a hair transplant for the men or the boob job for the woman or getting something as simple as a nose job to fix in certain religions, that's a huge thing. It's these things are there to help people feel better about themselves. And it comes back to body autonomy and having the ability to change something because you want that change, or that change helps you feel better and helps your mental health and helps you feel happier about who you are as a person. Any comments on that?
Yeah, I completely agree. Gender affirming care is as simple as hair transplants for men who are going bald. Any of those things, anything that affirms their gender is gender affirming care. And there's a lot of talk these days about puberty blockers. Well, people forget that puberty blockers have been prescribed since the 70s for cisgender kids who are undergoing precocious puberty or puberty too early before their peers are. And it was and still to this day, the majority of those who are prescribed puberty blockers are not trans people. They're kids who are cisgender, who are undergoing puberty too early. And gender affirming care, the majority of those who are prescribed estrogen supplements or testosterone replacement therapy are not trans people. They're cisgender people, like women undergoing menopause or men with low testosterone in older age. We are still a very small part of the population. And while I'm here, the other thing that I would really like to see change in this country is to stop the monetization of anti-trans rhetoric on social media. You know, so many of us have been attacked, not just politically with the laws, but for example, I was attacked by libs of TikTok this past summer during Mother's Day because I made a comment online about how it felt to be a mother as a trans woman. And I received thousands of death threats within the space of about 5 days. Because for the content creators who make such content, they feel it gets them views and clicks. And I would love to see that go away in addition to the political stuff. So sorry to change
No,
topics.
no. That's totally fine because that's a reality, right? And this is
Yeah.
a reality that we face as individuals. Our lives are already on the chopping blocks, and things like this put targets on our back. Things like this empowers people to attack us unnecessarily or feel that they can have physical contact or reach out to us and speak their mind to us as they see fit without fear of consequence. There are no consequences for the people who make these kind of posts or these kind of things. And then there are no consequences for the people who follow suit. And it's very much like what we experienced with January 6th. It's very much like what we experienced with the Black Lives Matter movement. There were so many people who thought it was okay to speak down on people like George Floyd because of their past and their history and to disregard the fact that they were murdered. That it all went out the window because they had some little scuffle in history or they had some bad run-in. All of a sudden now they're this horrible human being that deserved to die. I don't think that that's right. And so these kind of actions, someone doing that makes people feel justified in attacking you. That's not fair. That's not right. That's not that. Where's the law? Now where's the country you so heavily fight for? Where's this part of it, right? I think to that effect, we have so many people on the other side of that who are not lucky. They are not blessed enough to live and tell the tale of the people who have assaulted them or attacked them or murdered them. That's a reality that we live in as people under this umbrella. It's any one of us could have something like this happen. So as horrible as it is to hear, and I am sorry for that, and I definitely was one of the people who reported that. I'll be honest. I don't give a crap. I'll say it out loud. I reported it several times from every account I have, but that's just me. Because I think that that's just unfair, and it's crazy that they get away with it.
One thing I was going to mention is that not only are there no repercussions for the behavior that has harmed so many people, including you, Jules, but they're financially benefiting. These people are making a living, for some, a very good living. So it's an incentive to be this way, regardless of whatever sort of personal viewpoint led them to be this hateful person on the internet. They are incentivized to continue to be that and are making a real living from it. So essentially, these companies, the social media companies, are paying these people to incite violence against people like you and so many other people who they attack on the internet. And it's really just the worst part of social media. And I could have a whole other panel on my opinion of social media.
We'll definitely revisit it for sure because it's a hot button topic.
One other thing, just to sort of shift, that I wanted to bring up that is just kind of looking ahead and what concerns me, and we saw it a lot last session, both in the state and others, is all of this hateful legislation seems to be culminating in an attempt to define sex and gender in these incredibly narrow, inaccurate forms, and simply to align with a worldview that does not exist. Jules or Angelique, you brought up the point of how legislation against the trans community impacts the bodily autonomy of women and impacts the civil liberties of immigrants. And this is exactly how it does that, by creating this worldview where only certain people who obey and agree with this worldview can survive under these types of policies and regimes. What is concerning is that you can now start to see how things are coming together for their goals, or certainly they're showing their cards on how they'd like the world to be aligned.
Well, that is all the time we have for today. So before we go, everybody, we're going to get the question. I've been asking it to everybody, and I love this question. It started off as a cute, quick joke, and now it's a serious thing. So fingers on the clock, Thanos snap. You can get rid of one stigma that the community faces. You can, in an instant, there's no questions, no ifs, ands, or buts. What's one stigma you would erase in a Thanos snap? I'll start with Quinn.
All right. Well, I guess mine would be that life-saving, medically necessary care is supported only by poor, low-quality evidence and not on the best practices and medical consensus established by decades of clinical experience and endorsed by major national and international medical associations that it is actually based on. This thinking undermines all of the care bans that we've been seeing, specifically on youth across the country. And today there are 26 states that have banned youth access to care. Of course, Florida was the first just about 18 months ago. So yeah, that medically necessary care isn't well researched or effective. It absolutely is. And we know that the state sanctioned discrimination and cruelty is not going to endure, like we've all discussed, and that doing the work is always worth it, even though it's so difficult. And that being ourselves is always worth it. So thank you.
I love that one. Way to go. Anna Jules, first one.
I'll go ahead just because I have a bit of a cop-out. I feel like I may have already mentioned that one thing, and that is this drive to define sex and gender under these narrow, entirely inaccurate precepts, because it really is the crux of how they wish to harm the trans community, the LGBT community, people of color, you name it. Like I said, anyone who just does not want to get in line, obey, and agree, their worldview will crush. And so I think that definition of sex and gender is really core to that, because when you're defining these very personal things, you are limiting people's ability to exist of all types, and it's certainly not the place of government to be doing, and quite disturbing. So Thanos snap that right quick.
No, I love that one. And it's not a cop-out. That's a good one. If we got rid of that, do you know how many problems that would solve?
Everything. It's a cop-out because I already said it. I didn't think of a new one.
No, care would just be care. It wouldn't have to be gender affirming. It would just be care. I get the care that I need because I need it, not because I want it or desire it or it's popular or trendy, but because it's what I need. And that's between me and my freaking doctor and nobody else. Like, period. I love it. And closing us out.
Well, if we're talking impossible Thanos snap type things, I would say the belief that it is okay to assault, attack, and murder trans people just for existing. We lost 320 people in 2023 around the world due to anti-trans violence. And if nothing else, if we lose our healthcare, if we lose our civil rights, at least we could have our right to live. At least these people would be alive. They wouldn't be happy having lost those other things, but at least they wouldn't have lost their life just for existing in the world as a transgender person. So that would be the thing I'd change.
What a sobering reality. That one is a very good one. And I agree with you all, obviously, but that one, more than anyone, I think the amount of people who have been murdered and their murderers still run free, or their murderers are not being convicted at the rate at which other murderers might be convicted, which I think is a crazy assumption. I think if you murder someone, it doesn't really matter who or what, but that act alone should automatically sentence you to something, especially when it's done out of hate or spite or dislike. The rise of hate crimes has gone up in the past year and a half, let alone the murders, especially trans women of color specifically. The list is scary to see every year as it doesn't go down. It never goes down. It always somehow manages to even out or be higher. And so I think that that's a really good one. And I hope that it's not an impossible task. I hope that we can at least get justice for those that are harmed or something to that effect, if nothing else. And it is a doable thing. It is accomplishable. Maybe not completely erase the attacks themselves, but the justice for them, and to ensure that it doesn't happen or that people don't take it lightly or think that they can get away with it, is totally something that could be done. Will it though? Time will tell. But thank you guys so much for being here, for being so important a part of this conversation. Thank you for joining us for Transgender Awareness Week, for being a part of the experience and sharing your experiences. For those of you at home, be sure to tune in tomorrow for our next panel as we continue the conversation about myths and some of the stigmas that we are looking to break this year and forever, hopefully, by educating you and entertaining you on our panels. Thank you guys again. Have a wonderful day, and we'll see you later.